thank you very much, Mark Murray with the environmental group Californians Against Waste. I was also kind of involved in the Prop 67 campaign. I mention that to say that I am so appreciative, our organization and really all the coalition of groups are so appreciative of the extraordinary effort by NCRA and NCRA members and volunteers in terms of doing phone banking and outreach in this fantastic video. So I want to thank you all for that. So I want to talk about the beverage container recycling program. I could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about that program, but my objective today is really threefold because the program is facing, I would argue, its greatest challenge since it began 30 years ago. And so I want to, number one, tell you why I believe the bottle bill, the Beverage Container Recycling Act, is still important. I want to talk about the problem, and I want to talk about the opportunity to address the problem right here, right now, over the course of the next 3 months here in California. So number one, yes, we have this beverage container recycling program that creates a refund for consumers to get their money back if they so choose to do that. Unlike other beverage container recycling laws, this program also supports all of the recycling infrastructure, and that anyone that wants to participate, anyone that wants to play, gets money. Curbside recycling programs in California get over $150 million a year in revenue from the beverage container recycling program. Without this program, rates would have to increase. But the reason that I want to talk about it today is that the beverage container recycling law, back before we even knew what the hell producer responsibility meant, the legislature and the organizations that helped enact this put in place a producer responsibility provision that requires the producers and consumers of beverages to internalize the net cost of recycling, basically to pay the net cost of recycling when the scrap value was insufficient to do that. And we do this through the manufacturers pay a processing fee and recyclers get a processing payment. Now, the two have become disconnected over time, and I don't have time to talk about that. But what I do want to talk about is this concept and the importance of protecting this concept, even if you don't go to buyback recycling centers, even if you think that that is an anachronism and that we've moved beyond bottles and cans. It's really important for us to defend and to highlight this provision of producer responsibility. What has happened in the last, as I think maybe many of you are aware, over the last 14 years, is that California's recycling infrastructure under the beverage container recycling law is losing $1.25 million every single month. And they're losing that money because the recycling cost calculation is wrong. It's wrong in two specific areas. Probably I'm not going to be able to get into details of that, but the bottom line is that we're losing in excess of $200 million, we're losing in excess of $40 million a year in terms of buyback recycling, in terms of curbside recycling, and really importantly, consumers are losing. Because of this reduction in revenue to the recycling infrastructure, more than 450 buyback recycling centers in California have been forced to close. Many of these recycling centers are in rural Northern California. So in some cases, folks have found the way. They're standing in line now to get their redemption, their money back. But there has been a real measurable loss in the volume of beverage containers that are recycled in California. And again, that is in excess of $1 million per month of consumers losing redemption value. And I want you to think about who are the consumers that go out there and redeem their containers for cash, and can those consumers afford collectively to be losing $1 million per month in redemption value? And honestly, I don't care whether they bought the container or they're picking it up on the side of the road or they're picking it out of trash cans or somewhere else. The bottom line is that the recycling infrastructure is broken because we are shortchanging it. So just as succinctly as I can put it, every 2 years, CalRecycle does a calculation of the cost of recycling, and that becomes this baseline. We subtract from that the average scrap value. We certainly, I think everyone in this room knows that the scrap value for material, for glass, for plastic, for aluminum has dropped to record low levels. Because of that drop, the processing payment is supposed to go up and cover the difference. The problem is that the recycling cost calculation that was done in 2016 was incorrect. It failed to acknowledge the increased labor costs of recycling centers, so labor costs inexplicably went down. And secondly, the calculation has built into it a provision that requires CalRecycle to provide a reasonable financial return. And CalRecycle made the decision through regulation to calculate reasonable financial return by purchasing a Dun & Bradstreet report of the national recycling sector. And how did they do on their taxes? How did they report they did? And whatever that number is, whatever that fraction is, that's what you multiply the cost of recycling. Well, lo and behold, the recycling sector across the country lost money. Negative 4.5% was a loss for the entire recycling sector. CalRecycle regulations said you have to use that percentage. So instead of adding a reasonable financial return to the cost of recycling, they subtracted 4.5% from the cost of recycling. So recyclers aren't getting the average scrap value, and they're certainly not getting any reasonable financial return. That's, as simply as I can put it, that's the problem. That's what's costing the fund and consumers millions of dollars. So what can be done? On April 1st, CalRecycle and the governor's office will be putting forward a budget solution. And this is an opportunity for the administration to put their solution forward in a very abbreviated policy-making process, a policy-making process that will literally begin in April. There will be a handful of hearings as part of the budget with the opportunity for this solution to be put in place on July 1st. The recycling sector in California, not just the CZ recycling infrastructure, but the O-line buyback recycling infrastructure, curbside recyclers, and the consumers that are still out there redeeming their containers for cash. They need this solution effective July 1st. Frankly, we are proposing that the recycling payment fix be retroactive to January 1st because of the loss of revenue. We don't know specifically what the administration is going to put forward on April 1st. That is ultimately up to the governor. But I have a tremendous amount of faith, particularly this past week, in the leadership of CalRecycle. And CalRecycle, for those of you who don't know, Teresa Bowie from our office has been appointed by the governor as a special assistant to the director at CalRecycle and is moving over starting today. Today is her first day. Thus, my confidence in what the administration may be unveiling, but I also have a great deal of faith in the whole team at the Division of Recycling and CalRecycle in terms of putting forward a good proposal. I just hope that the governor is going to listen, and that's where you come in. There are two things that I need from you, that Californians Against Waste and the recycling programs that we all care about need from you. We need the folks that are in this room, because honestly, if the folks in this room can't write letters and make phone calls to elected representatives, I'm not sure who else in the state is going to do that. So I am really counting on folks that are informed to communicate with your elected representatives. Now, all of your elected representatives in the Bay Area, they're all fantastic. There's one in particular that we need to focus attention on, though, and that is the chair of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. And as the chairman of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, he is the person that will be influencing on the Senate side this policy the most. And he represents Hayward, Newark, kind of the south part of the East Bay. And the opportunity here is that he's already had a select hearing on this issue. They've heard the problem. But what I'm being told by members of the legislature, by staff, is that they're not hearing from constituents. So what I'm asking folks to do is to communicate with your representatives, to communicate with, if you are members of associations, if you're local governments, if you're involved with local government, if you're involved with private sector recycling companies, to communicate the problem. Don't worry about the details of the solution. Communicate the problem. The problem is that recycling infrastructure is being shortchanged, that we're seeing about a 10 to 15% reduction in the amount of processing payments that is being paid out for glass, for plastic, that the manufacturers of these materials need to be paying the fair share, they need to be covering the full net cost of recycling. That's the key step that needs to happen between April 1st and July 1st in terms of advancing this proposal. I'd like us to start communicating these messages literally immediately, because we have to influence the governor's office. We want the governor's office to embrace the Plan A that comes out of the team at CalRecycle. And by making some noise, I'm hoping that we can make that happen. Lots of other details with this program, lots of specifics that we're working on with various stakeholders to update the program. If there's an opportunity and questions for me to kind of respond to some of those, I'm happy to do that. I had 2 stopwatches on that, so that's how I was able to dial it in.
Questions?
Southeast Bay, the name of the guy.
Wachowski, Bob Wachowski, Senator Wachowski, to all of us. He's a great guy. He's a really great guy, and he cares about this issue, but it hasn't risen. We were trying to get him to do an urgency bill, and so Senator Wachowski, very politely communicating, I think he's on our side, but he needs to kind of, he needs to know that it has to happen immediately. But honestly, it's always important to communicate with your direct representatives, but it's also in order to communicate directly with the chair of the committee.
All right, right over here.
Good morning. Is there a way that NCRA could go and put something together that we can send out to everybody and we can just forward?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
So, yes.
I can communicate it to you. I can hand you a
Yes.
piece of paper that will succinctly communicate the action plan on this.
Absolutely, that's a good step. We do have some stuff at our booth already today, right? In here, I saw something. Okay.
Can you release the model bill budget, like how much they spend on administration costs? I know a large portion of that goes to administration as opposed to the program.
And if you could repeat the
Sure.
question.
So how much of the beverage container recycling program budget goes to administration? It's about $50 million in a $1.2 billion program. I'm not sure that that's excessive. This is a program that has to collect CRV and processing fees from literally, I was just looking at the list, 1,700 different payers pay processing fees. An even greater number, separate number, pay redemption value. So I'm not sure it's out of whack. Was that kind of your question, or?
And if we could just see like the whole pie, like where everything kind of goes, I mean, that would be, I'm kind of visual.
Sure. We do have, there is a quarterly report that has literally a pie chart in it, but I think we might have, it's probably outdated, but I can, if you send me an email, I'll get you the pie to see it. But the bottom line is that, we've got almost an 80% recycling rate. The recycling rate has actually dropped below 80% for the first time since 2009. And so there's actually a bigger pot of unredeemed money. Most of that money is going back out to the recycling infrastructure.
Let's get this gentleman, if we have time, maybe one more, but yeah, go ahead.
Mark, part of the resolution to the bleeding all this money has been some comments about reducing certain payments to certain elements of the program or a proportional reduction. Do you know if that's going to be in the governor's budget still?
No, it's not going to be in the governor's budget. So I'm sorry. So there is a fail-safe in the program that if the program, so the question is proportional reduction. Is proportional reduction going to happen? So for any of you insiders that are not insiders, what that means is that if there isn't enough money in the fund, when recycling rates are really high and expenditures are really high, if there isn't enough money to cover the various expenditures, then there's a kind of a fail-safe proportional reduction where everyone gets a haircut, everyone loses some. And the good news is that recycling rates have dropped. That means there's more unredeemed money. So the proportional reduction fear that when the department was projecting 84, 85% recycling rates is really gone. The program is sitting on a $200 million surplus right now. $200 million. And so, yes, they're saying maybe that's going to happen down the line, but it's not the pressing issue that caused the administration to not put forward a solution 12 months ago.
Okay, so I think we're going to have to cut the Q&A now, but Mark, will you be here?
I'll be hanging out for a little bit. Can I take one 30-second?
Sure.
So one 30-second thing, I do want to mention that San Francisco, one of the details of this program is the buyback recycling infrastructure and the convenience zones. And I just want to note that San Francisco has lost almost all of their buyback recycling centers for a lot of bad reasons. But the bottom line is they're working very creatively. The team at the Department of the Environment, they've got Tom Wright working with them, and they have also got their state senator, Scott Wiener, working on a creative solution that may actually make sense for other communities. So if you really care about the details of the convenience zone recycling infrastructure, I want to suggest you have a conversation with Tom Wright, who's in the back of the room. Take care.
All right,
Thanks a
thank
lot
you.
for the time, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.